So welcome, everyone. Great to have you here this morning. My name is Rory McCaw. I'm a managing consultant at Infront Consulting Group. Pleased to present to you a session this morning on Experience the Ultimate in Desktop Support with Operations Manager. We're going to go a little bit beyond Operations Manager in the context of desktop support this morning and really try to provide you with some context around what we've seen and what we do with customers on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis in helping them to leverage the tools across the System Center suite, primarily Operations Manager, Configuration Manager, and now what was Opalis, now Orchestrator, to help in both the proactive monitoring of business-critical desktops within your environment, but also in helping you to ensure that there's consistency and standardization across those systems in your monitoring settings, and to provide a means of remediating issues and really help to empower the desktop support admin in their role or the SCOM admin in their role to, from a central console, leverage the different tools that exist in the suite today and remediate different issues. So the presentation, as I put it together, it really starts off with only a few slides, and then we get into the majority of the presentation being demo-driven. We'll talk briefly initially about desktop monitoring challenges, and this is really where a lot of this presentation came out of, are the different challenges faced by our enterprise and mid-market customers. From there, we'll move into proactive desktop monitoring and management with System Center, and again, really focusing on 3 different tools within that System Center suite. The first of those being OpsMan, the second ConfigMan, and then the third Opalis, or Orchestrator. We're using, in my demo environment today, all of the new System Center suite, so it's all the 2012 product line. Not to say that any of this couldn't apply to your existing implementations with 2007 R2 for Operations Manager, or ConfigMan, or even leveraging Opalis. So when it comes to different challenges that we've encountered, depending on the market vertical, obviously there are some key differences, but we've done a lot of work in the financial services sector in particular, and across different trading floor environments with some large financials. When supporting that trading floor environment, you're working with individuals who are not only highly paid, but the work that they do involves certainly a desktop, often a virtualized desktop, and multiple displays so that they can execute trades and bring in income into the firm. So keeping those systems up and running and optimized, both from a performance and an availability perspective, is critical. And what tends to drive availability in that type of setting, from what we've seen, is standardization across the desktop. So the more that we can do to ensure that there are standards in place and those standards are being adhered to after, and I guess before and after, application deployments and upgrades, which tend to be fairly common in those types of environments, as there are multiple releases often throughout the course of even a month for different trading floor applications. We need to ensure that different application dependencies are in place and consistent, and we can use a variety of tools now in the System Center suite to do that. So part of the first demo that we'll look at in just a minute is how we can use SCOM to drive some of those discoveries and return that data into a single pane of glass, into the Operations Manager dashboard, and allow you, through an eyeball view or through different settings within the views, to really hone in on what could be causing the problem to reduce the mean time to repair and give you more power as the administrator to hone in on what the actual issue or potential issue is. And then also through tasks or through runbooks that we can now automate and integrate into the Operations Manager console, we can execute remediations. So one of the other challenges that we've encountered, and this is bullet number 2, is the application process monitoring, or specifically multiple individual processes and the performance of how they're operating. So again, going back to a trading floor scenario, it's not uncommon to find a trader with X number, maybe 16 different instances of Excel running at any time. And if we look at applications like Excel, where as you spawn multiple instances, the executable is all the same, it's difficult within the native Operations Manager management packs to hone in on which of those 16 instances is consuming the most amount of memory or the most amount of CPU. But what we can do is we can break those out, and we can build out custom management packs so that you can identify which one of those individual processes is consuming the most amount of resources on that system. And then through a task within SCOM, we can select that process and decide whether or not we want to terminate that to improve performance for the trader. Terminating the process obviously isn't always the right approach, depending on the scenario. But if it's our last-ditch effort before we're going to reboot the box, then it might be something that we're willing to try. And then finally, expedited issue remediation. So that when we're in a high-stress, high-tension environment, it's critical that we're able to resolve issues quickly and get people back up and running based on their role within the organization. So we'll look at different ways in which we can do that. And as well, to try to avoid issues in the first place, we'll look at ways that we can use Configuration Manager with Operations Manager to really monitor for consistent configuration. And what I'm referring to here is what we had been referring to as DCM, or Desired Configuration Management, and what we're now calling Settings Management in the 2012 Config Manager product. So in terms of the tools in the suite that we'll look at monitoring. This can be applied both to desktops and to servers. The framework for this conversation or this session is more oriented towards the desktop. So we'll look at a combination of different desktop operating systems. Anything that's supported by Operations Manager in terms of an agent, so really XP and embedded all the way up to Windows 7 and soon Windows 8 would fall into the supported framework here. We'll look at the settings management component within Configuration Manager and how we can go about creating these to ensure that our monitoring tool set is actually configured properly and we can avoid issues with the monitoring framework. And then finally, we'll look at how we can integrate Orchestrator into the operations console and expose some of the runbooks that you may have built yourself or you may have imported through different integration packs. And we can not only get the health of the action server or the runbook server now, but we can also look at the overall health of the runbooks themselves. And we can see those and execute them with a task in Operations Manager. So the first tool that we're going to dive into is Operations Manager itself, where we're going to look at what we can do from a desktop monitoring and application health monitoring perspective. We'll then talk about how we may consider associating users with a desktop itself. So one of the challenges that we've come across is, as we're monitoring desktops within Operations Manager in larger environments, even on a single trading floor as one example, it's hard to identify which desktop belongs to which trader. But we can easily build in a task that looks at the locally logged on user. And if we are fairly certain that the locally logged on user is the typical user or the common user for that system, then we can link those two together through a task that we'll expose in Operations Manager. One other question that comes up quite frequently as a challenge is, I'd like to know which of my desktops are pending a reboot. So sometimes when we go to install an application, we're prompted with a dialog box indicating that a reboot's required before you can continue with the next installation. So maybe we'd just gone through a patching cycle, and for whatever reason, that desktop didn't get rebooted. So we can query through WMI, and we can identify which systems are pending reboot, and then we can present that in a very common and easy-to-understand view. One of the other requests that we've had is to identify who's logged onto the machine. So if you think about an environment where when you're logged on to your Windows Active Directory domain on the local desktop, and then you launch an application that runs on the desktop, and that application requires a separate login. Sometimes there can be a consistency between the user logged into the application, let's say Bloomberg or Reuters, and the user logged onto the desktop. So for compliance reasons as well as security reasons, we want to be able to see that there's consistency between the user that's logged onto the desktop and the user ID that's logged in to these line of business type applications. And those are things that we'll demonstrate how we can discover those in Operations Manager as well. From there, just some very common tasks that are quite easy to build out within an Operations Manager framework as a task and expose those in the console, but also restrict them based on your user role and your privileges. So we're certainly capable within the native framework of Operations Manager to build out multiple different user roles and grant specific roles access to these tasks. So by no means am I suggesting that you would give these tasks to all of, say, your first-line support or help desk or desktop admins, but based upon your level of comfort and how your organization is structured, you can limit and restrict which task is available to which user. And some of these things include things as simple as forcing a reboot remotely of that workstation, or enabling remote desktop so that we can RDP into that box, setting the current user as the registered owner so that we can create that alignment or ownership, between the correlation between the person logged on and the person that's using that system typically. And another very common one is needing to access the C drive on a remote desktop. So we can easily launch a task, pop up Windows Explorer, and connect into the C drive through the admin $share or the C $share, whatever shares are available, and gain access to that system so that we might copy over a file, an older Java DLL that we need to replace on that system due to an application dependency. So we'll flip over to the demo at this point and take a look at Operations Manager. So I'll minimize our slides. I'm RDP'd into our server, which is in the exhibit hall at our booth there, and connected to our host. If we take a look at the sessions that I have in place here and pull up my Operations Manager system, here we have the native 2012 Operations Manager console, very similar to 2007 R2 or 2007 SP1, if you're familiar with those consoles. I've created a couple of custom views, very simple to create, to allow us to see our Windows client computers as well as to see any closed alerts. So you can see I don't have an extensive number of these. One of them is actually in a grayed out state, meaning that it hasn't heartbeated in more than 3 minutes. We'll talk about how we can highlight that as well within Operations Manager. If we drill down, though, to our desktop monitoring, some of the things that we've been asked to do is simply discover the existence of applications. So I used a very basic but very common example here where, and again, there's some overlap between how you can use Operations Manager and Configuration Manager. But what we've done is just created a very basic discovery to allow you to identify where Adobe's installed, and just as importantly, created or captured an attribute or property of this new Adobe class that collects the version information. So now what I'm able to do is group on that and see all of my Windows systems or Windows 7 systems or just all of my Windows client, Windows 7 and XP systems that have a specific version of Adobe installed. And I can look for inconsistencies between that. This can be done for really any application, and it's just drilling into the registry and collecting that version information through a registry query. So quite straightforward. The other thing that we do is we collect the discovered user profiles. So on all of our various systems, not limited in this case to desktops, actually in this case it is limited to desktops, all of our Windows 7 systems and the local paths, as well as the security ID for those individuals, and then the user ID that corresponds to that. So we can quickly understand what the discovered user profiles are on that box, and we could easily build a task on the right-hand side to go and delete a profile or clean up profiles if that was something that was common as a remediation task within the organization. Moving down, here we can see all of our discovered workstations. And what we've done here is we've taken some of the base classes that come in the Windows Client Operating System Management packs, and we've added some additional properties by extending that. So some of the things that you can see in here are members of the local administrators group, which is something that is often requested by numerous customers, both for compliance and security reasons. What we can see here is who those members are, and if we view this in the upper bar, we added that in as a column, we could quickly see if there were any inconsistencies across all of our desktops. We can also see here the profiles that have been collected. We have, in this case, registered the owner. So we have some tasks over at the right-hand side that allow us to go in and align the currently logged on user as the owner. So we've done that for the admin. Sorry, we're just discovering the registered owner. I haven't done that. I was going to show you that in just a second. So here's our owner. So I believe I'm logged into that box right now. And if I kick off my set owner as current user, what we'll see here is a task that just popped up, and I could put in any arguments if I wanted to add any there, ensure that I have the requisite permissions to do this. And run that task. So that is now defined the owner of that system, and we can see that that completed successfully at the bottom, and it was run by the administrator account. So the next time that we run through a discovery, and the discoveries are set at different intervals, that information will be collected and populated within this, so that now typically we don't run these discoveries more than once a day on a desktop, just due to limiting performance issues, and because it doesn't change that often. So here, say at the end of the day, we'd see that value update, and we'd be able to have now a consistent list of who those owners are mapped to the different desktop systems. As we move through, one of the other requests that we've had is a look at whether or not BitLocker is enabled on our different logical drives. So one of the challenges that I have as an attendee of these conferences, like yourselves, as well as a speaker, is this looks great on my display, but we deal with large enterprises, and there's never only one system on my display. Normally there's 1,500, 10,000, whatever that number is, different systems. So here, it's a little bit misleading, and I wanted to point that out in the context that I don't necessarily want to see all of my logical drives that have BitLocker enabled as a property set to true. Instead, I'm showing you this here because of the limited number of systems, but as you go back to your organizations and look to implement this, you'd probably look to put in a group filter based on that being set to show me everything where it's not enabled, so that all you can see are the inconsistencies, and you reduce the amount of noise within the console. One of the common pieces of feedback that we receive when we have customers that we're working with that implement Operations Manager is it's a great tool, produces a lot of information, not all of which, however, is actionable. So how do I actually get into the actionable information, drill in, and find out what's going on? And the way to do that is to create custom views and leverage some of these discovered properties so that you can filter on that. So in this case, I'm in a sealed management pack, but if we look at another management pack as an example, and I'll actually go up to the view that I've created here for client computers, the way in which we do that is by going into the properties of that view and selecting the specific conditions. So here I'm filtering on Windows Client, which would include all of my various Windows Client operating systems, but I can also group on a group that I've created based on some unique properties. So I've created a group ahead of time called my Adobe 9 group, which includes all systems running Adobe 9. And if I introduce that into the mix and click OK, oh, I can't do that right now. Put that in a different management group. So let me choose something a little bit different. So if I choose something in a sealed management pack to show you the example, and we look for, let's say, our health service, and agent watchers. If I filter on an agent watchers group, it's likely that as I select OK, I may not actually see any systems appear here because I'm not using any of my clients as agent watcher systems. However, I may be, or somebody else may have set that up, or we'll wait for the refresh. So when it refreshes, I'm pretty confident that we're not going to see any agentless systems in a group. So those should effectively disappear. And as that redraws, we should see those disappear from there. My refresh is a little slower than normal. Let me come back to that. So we'll scroll back down to, I have hit F5. I appreciate the input there. The console is a little frozen at this time. OK, well, let me move on, and I'll come back to, there we go. It looks like it's refreshing, and there we go. So I have put in the group filter. None of those systems are running as agentless. So as this loads, that, well, I've changed groups now, but that should have updated. And through the query back to the database, we should see that no system exists. So I do actually want to see systems there, so let's go back into the properties, and we'll clear that and say OK, and then the original config will appear again. So apologize for the slowness there in the rendering, but it did help to demonstrate the point. So some of the items that we've looked at here are just the discoveries that we've exposed as different state views within Operations Manager. And those state views simply allow us to segment the data and highlight what information that we're interested in, as opposed to all information. So it goes back to the point that I was making earlier in regards to filtering through what I'll call the noise, oftentimes, within Operations Manager, and presenting you with the data that's most critical and can be used to drive your decisions in how you want to proceed to the next level. So as this redraws and re-renders, what we'll look at next are some of the tasks that we can execute and that we've built in as custom tasks that you can easily build out as well as you're looking to implement SCOM as a desktop monitoring solution. So let's look at our local administrators by workstation as an example. So here we have 2 Windows 7 systems. And one of the common requests that we have is to be able to drop a file and make a quick change from the Operations Manager system on to that remote system. So I'm obviously logged on to a SCOM server. It's a management server. It's the only one. I have a separate database server. It's not a Windows 7 box with a console. So if I select one of my Windows 7 systems and click on Browse the Admin Share, it opens up the admin share on that box. And now I'm easily able to maybe reference a UNC path or a map drive from my desktop, and I'm able to now copy a file over into the right directory. And what we've often found here is we're opening this up to copy over, say, a Java DLL from an older version of Java, as somebody applied a Java update, and that caused an inconsistency because it was a dependency of another line of business application. So one very quick way to do that, and just to prove that we can write to that, we can click on New and define a new text file, and I'll call this test.txt. And there we have it. So very simple to do. And behind the scenes, all I'm doing there is calling a little batch file that's in a local directory on my management server. So this would just have to exist on your console server to remote in and leverage the credentials of the logged on user. One of the other requests we have is I'm a remote user. I'm in the field. We have a SCOM agent on your system, and I need to be able to install a local printer. So they want to become local administrator to do that. That may or may not be something that, according to your corporate policies, you allow. But in some organizations, we've had a request to simplify this process and allow this to occur. So to do that, what we could look at doing is leveraging one of our other tasks here. We have a number of different tasks. And one of my tasks, if I scroll up, and I'm not seeing it right there. So let me change views to workstation locations and owners. The reason I'm not always seeing the tasks that I'm looking for is because the tasks are context sensitive. And what I mean by context sensitive is they are sensitive to the context of the class that we've targeted them to as we built those out. And for whatever reason, I should be seeing those here, and I am not seeing them up here. Unless I'm blind to that. So let's try another one as another example. So here I can go into the remote machine and enable remote desktop, as opposed to adding a user to the administrators group. I'll put in some credentials to do that. And helps if I spell administrator right. And that task should execute, and it's now enabled remote desktop on that system. So now I can easily RDP into that. And again, all we're doing there is flipping a bit in the registry on that remote system and changing it from a 0 or a 1 or a 1 to a 0, depending on the task that we're looking at, whether it's enabling or disabling that. So number of very easy things to do. I alluded to the killing of a process or terminating of a process earlier, and this is also something that we can do. So if you know you have a process running on that system, we can add in an argument through an override. And in this case, we could put in something like notepad.exe. And that will now be the process name that we're going to terminate on this remote system. So I don't believe it's actually running on that system right now. So let's connect over. It's actually a different box. So let me just start it up on this one, and I'll change my task to correspond to that. So we've launched Notepad on Pro 07, and if I go back to my Operations Manager system, and we select the Pro 07 system and go to terminate that process and put in the proper credentials and password, as well as the arguments for notepad.exe. What we're now able to do is execute that, and within a short period of time, that should terminate the Notepad process, which it did, and we should be able to confirm that by just popping back over and seeing that Notepad is no longer running. So one of the other things that we can do is push down tasks and have those execute remotely on the agent, known as an agent-based task, versus a console task, which is something that would pop up in the console or on the system where that console is executing. So a couple of different examples there of how we can leverage tasks within Operations Manager and the types of information that we can present. If we look down into the performance counter section, this is where we can look at building out different performance views. A couple of examples as defaults that we've incorporated here, things like % free disk space, so that we could track that. Our Java CPU performance for a given Java app or Java process. Our network bytes total per second. Some of these really just pulled from the base management packs that we have with the Windows client operating system. Total CPU usage by workstation and total available memory megabytes by workstation as well. And then we can use the native dashboarding functionality within SCOM to populate those different examples within a dashboard and present that back to us within our environment. So here as we take a look back at our example and we look at the different information that's being collected at the bottom, what we're seeing is information that may be useful to you from a troubleshooting perspective. So again, additional information that is very easy to collect and expose would be things like your Internet Explorer browser versions, the different browsers that are on the system. We've had requests to determine if an instance of VNC or an instance of LogMeIn or some remote application connection tool exists on that system. The shared heap size and pulling that information out, what the GINA DLL is for the system, as well as collecting our uptime, determining whether or not RDP is enabled, who was the last user to log into that machine, and then we can set the location and the owner. So here, if you're not sure where that system is located, but you know where the user sits within the building, we're able to now select the system at the top, and through a task on the right-hand side, we can set the workstation location. So this could be right down to, say, the network port and drop of the desk where that individual is, or this could be something like next to the Coke machine on the 3rd floor, if we're talking about maybe a discovered device like a printer, or maybe we're monitoring the Coke machine for whether it has any Coke left in it. So in the arguments here, we can just enter a location. So I can put in here 3rd floor by a merge exit. And click on override and put in some credentials. And now what we're able to do is execute that task. And it helps if you spell the password correctly. And we can set that as the workstation location. I should be able to just run it without the credentials. So just let me put in 3rd floor. There we go. So with the right credentials, it does make a world of difference. We can see now that that's going to be set, and that will get populated during the next discovery, which could happen as regularly as, say, every 15 minutes, every hour. Really doesn't have to happen more than once a day. So these are some examples of what we can do within the native technology through just a little bit of quick customizations. If we go up to active alerts for a second, the other thing that might be interesting to point out is in a large enterprise or mid-market environment, you're likely to find grayed out agents. And what we've done is we've put together some logic to both detect and to alert you on grayed out systems. So what I mean by grayed out systems is a system that really hasn't heartbeated in the last 3 minutes and isn't responding to an ICMP ping. So if we are interested in finding out what those are and grouping those, because it's not a filter that you can apply in the standard criteria for view sorting within Operations Manager, we've created a custom rule in this case to do that, and it returns to us in a comma-delimited fashion what the two systems are that are in a grayed out state. And now we can look into what might be causing this. The most common way to resolve this is to simply start the service. It's often that the health service or system center management is not started or is stopped. If it is started and it's grayed out, we often stop it, we'll flush the agent cache, and then restart it. And within about 1 minute to 2 minutes, those systems usually go back to either a green warning or a critical state and come back online. So one way to quickly remediate that. And those are tasks that, again, are shown on the right-hand side, where we can flush the agent task. We could run something like get the agent processor utilization to see whether it's spiking. One of the things that we have come across in different implementations is where there is a dependency on, say, WSH, your Windows scripting host version, or where there is an issue with a WMI memory leak. We could see high utilization of anything agent-based that's leveraging WMI, and then we could look at recycling the agent service and really resetting the memory that it's consuming. So one example of that. If we scroll down through the alerts, the other thing that I wanted to point out here is some other custom logic that allows us to detect a system restart is pending. So again, this is implemented through a monitor that allows us to see through a WMI query which systems are in a pending reboot state. And what I've done to simplify the view into this is we can easily create a view on the left-hand side to expose that information. So I've created this view called Systems Pending Restart. And again, now I'm filtering down on the data that's most of interest to me, most critical, and allow me to then maybe execute a reboot of that system if the timing is appropriate and remediate that problem. While I'm looking at this system, going back to our earlier example, we see the add user to local administrator task. So I'm going to demonstrate that just to show you how that works. But I'm not going to do it against Web 01. Instead, knowing that it's targeted to Windows Server or the Windows operating system, I could select really any view that includes my systems, showing them as Windows operating systems. So I can do that on the client, I can do that on the server. For simplicity, I'll just run it here, click on Add User to Local Administrators Group, and again, I just have to override the user that I want to put in here. So my demo, or my domain is called InFront Demo, and my username I can use as Mr. Singapore as an account that we have in our environment. Click on Override, and I will put in credentials this time. And execute that task. So this will go out and add that user to our MMS Web 01 system as a local administrator. My task seems to have paused temporarily. And it will update that account. And then we can quickly and easily verify that on the remote system. So while that's running and catching up in the background, what we'll notice on the left-hand side are some of the, the additional line of business applications that we monitor within different trading floor environments, everything from Bloomberg Professional to BrokerTech to eSpeed, and through some, again, a little bit of custom management pack development, we can expose information that is of interest to the desktop monitoring groups within those organizations. So there we see that the task is completed successfully, and we've now leveraged a number of different tasks to accomplish possibly remediation issues or troubleshooting issues within the environment itself. So if I minimize our RDP session for a moment and go back to our slide deck, the next topic that I wanted to touch upon was how we can leverage Configuration Manager, and in particular, Settings Management, to look for inconsistencies in your Operations Manager monitoring framework. So what we found is that one of the most common the most common failures of a monitoring system within an environment is that the agents are either accidentally disabled or turned off at some point in time, or there is inappropriate configuration settings, usually through manual deployments. Through the push deployment, it's very consistent. But if you're doing a lot of manual deployments, and those deployments, when they're manual, tend to be within a perimeter-type network where security and the need for security is that much more important, we've found that customers really like and benefit from creating some settings management files or baselines to allow us to look for configuration changes and present them with anything that is in a non-compliant state and be able to run a report quickly and then obviously remediate those issues as well. So in the next demo, we'll take a look at settings management, and this will leverage our SCCM technology, in this case SCCM 2012. So if I minimize my display and I connect into, if I scroll down and look for my config man, there we go. So what we have here in the config manager console is some different compliance baselines. Now we've created a single baseline in this case called the SCOM health check, which includes a couple of different configuration items. Each one of these configuration items looking for a different setting or a different property for your operations manager agent. Now, by no means is this limited to operations manager, and by no means is it an extensive look at all of the things that we can monitor, but it's a great example of how you can use both tools together, ConfigMan and OpsMan, to ensure consistency in your settings with ConfigMan to allow the monitoring, the proactive monitoring that Operations Manager provides to actually work effectively. So in this example, we're looking at the health service and whether or not that's running, the startup type being set to automatic, the port number that the agent is running on, and we're going to then enumerate that for compliance. So to demonstrate this, if I minimize my ConfigMan console and I open up my Windows 7 systems, one of my Windows 7 desktops, I'm just going to temporarily stop my System Center management service. Now, we go into the properties of that service. That's often known as the health service by the name of the executable. And by stopping that, we've now ensured that we're in a non-compliant state. We can also see that the startup property or startup type is set to manual, which is also non-compliant. So to determine our compliance level, we put the DCM or settings management policies in place. And if I launch my config manager shortcut and go to configurations and perform an evaluation, you'll notice that we are in a non-compliant state. And if we view the report for that, what you'll see are all of the different non-compliant settings. So the startup type being set to manual currently is non-compliant with the automatic. It's not running, so the actual baseline configuration test or check is failing on us. And we're in a critical severity from a non-compliance perspective. So let me minimize that browser window. And what we're able to do is quickly remediate those issues. So if I go into System Center Management and go into Properties, the first thing I'll do is set the service to automatic. And then the second thing I'll do is I'll start that service. And by clicking OK and saving those, I can now go back to my Configuration Manager Properties dialog box and reevaluate. And by reevaluating, you'll now see at a high level, I'm in a compliant state. And I can view the report for that and see that we're back to green, and everything is now compliant. So I now meet my baseline. So this is a great way to look at the different configuration settings that are of interest to you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for Operations Manager. It could really be for any line of business application. Maybe one of your line of business applications requires a specific version of Java, or another a specific version of a given browser, like Internet Explorer. We could build in those compliant, non-compliant tests and configurations into settings management and deploy those out to a simple collection. So in this case, I've deployed this to my SCCM server, as well as any system that's running Windows 7. So to demonstrate how we've gone about doing that, if I just minimize my client and we go back to the Configuration Manager administration console, if we look at any one of these and go into the properties of our configuration items, this is where we can scroll through the different property pages that show you what we've done to create these. So the first thing you'll notice on the Supported Platforms tab is that we've selected all of our different Windows operating system platforms, but you could opt in or opt out of any one of those. In the settings, to determine whether or not that health service was started, we're just using a very basic query. And if we click on Edit to see what that is, we're looking in the root SimV2 namespace at the class Win32_service and the property called started, and looking for the specific service name, so where name equals, in single quotes, health service. So very straightforward. And in fact, this same logic that we're looking at here is logic that we can use in Operations Manager in our discoveries. So if we talk about WMI-based discoveries, we could leverage this same logic to drive the discovery of a line of business service. So one of the, I'll say, misconceptions with some folks out there that are working with SCOM is that we're limited to registry discoveries, where in fact we have a lot of different discovery types available to us. Within the Operations console, we're only able to leverage WMI and registry-based discoveries. But if we go outside of that Operations console into the Auth console, we have the ability to leverage LDAP discoveries, .NET Managed Code discoveries, and OLADB discoveries. So we can really extend and grow what it is that we're looking for and take advantage of that. So here, again, I could say select star from Win32_service, where name equals health service, and that could then drive a discovery that would instantiate or create a new class for me within Operations Manager that I could then target. So where would you want to go about doing that? Well, when it comes to trying to target in and pinpoint the systems that run a given application, so if we have an application like an antivirus application, and we want to discover where that system exists and then create rules and monitors that target that, we can leverage that by creating these discoveries through WMI and pinpointing that service. In terms of the compliance rules, on the next tab, this is where I determine or select how I want to deal with this setting once it's detected. So if the health service is started and that equals true, the severity I've set to critical, and I haven't set any type of automated remediation. So I've left that up to the administrator to take care of. If we look at our compliance rules, again, we can see really what we just looked at on the last tab. Our relationships here, and which we haven't defined, and then the security of who has access to these. So quite straightforward in how we can go about creating baselines, and one example of how we do that. If we look at another example of the agent port, just to show you that we're leveraging, say, a query into the registry, if we look at the properties of this configuration item, and again, supported platforms being consistent, this is looking for the registry value. By going into Edit, we can see exactly what the path is within the registry that we're looking for, and we're looking to collect the value that's in the port and ensure that that is set to port 5723, and that that exists. So if it doesn't exist or it's the incorrect port, we're going to be in a non-compliant state. So we can define our compliance rules. Here we're just looking for the fact that it exists, and then relationships and security. So very straightforward to create these different configuration items, which can be bundled within a configuration baseline, and deploy these to your different systems, be it desktops or servers within the enterprise, to allow you to be alerted to standardization changes or deviations from the norm. So as we turn back to the slides, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is Orchestrator and how we can leverage Orchestrator within Operations Manager and what we've done to expose that. So one of the things that we've announced this week as a company is a free Orchestrator MP. If any of you are leveraging Orchestrator or have plans to leverage Orchestrator, what you'll find from the Microsoft MP is it will discover your different systems as part of your orchestrator architecture, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't discover your runbooks and monitor the health of those runbooks. So that's something that we've incorporated and released and is available, or will be available on the web at the end of the day today on the on the Infront site. So the link to where you'll be able to find that once we make that formal announcement a little later today is infrontconsulting.com/mp.php. So what this does is this discovers our runbooks, it monitors the runbooks, it includes a task to allow you to execute the runbooks now within Operations Manager. So again, the whole concept here is we're trying to integrate these tools so that from a single console, in this case the Operations Manager console, you're able to take advantage of some of the investments that you've made in the other technologies. So let's take a look at exactly what we can do here. So if we go back to my Operations Manager console, and we look in our System Center Orchestrator runbook, what we've exposed through a discovery is all of the different runbooks that exist on another system that I have within my environment. So the system, the orchestrator system in our environment is called MMS SCO01. And what we've done is simply imported the free Infront System Center Orchestrator Management Pack, and it's gone out and discovered the different properties. Now I've changed the discovery intervals, which are typically a little longer than every 60 seconds, or typically once a day. And we've forced a discovery here so that you can see those. But by selecting any one of these, we could go about then executing that runbook by clicking on Start Runbook on the right-hand side. So what you're able to see are the different runbooks that we have, things like returning a service request, user inputs as text, our service status check, creating a new runbook, number of different things, anything from creating a VM template, getting computer status, starting, stopping maintenance mode, things that are commonly requested, even starting unplanned maintenance mode as an example. So that if a system did go into a critical state and we're now well aware of that, but we wanted to start suppressing alerts, we could force maintenance mode but set it to unplanned. Resetting counters, creating VMs from templates, installing IIS 7 as part of a workflow or a sequence, adding a new AD user, kicking off an automatic funds transfer, whatever those runbooks are. Some of these, obviously, you would limit based on permissions to who has access to these. But if we look at this one as an example and click on Start Runbook, what you're able to see is that we can put the the orchestrator system into maintenance mode from the SCOM console by simply executing this runbook, which is now integrated into Operations Manager. So as this process runs, and there we go, we see that it completed successfully. And then within a minute, if we take a look at our Windows computers, we should see that that system has been put into maintenance mode once that updates. There's the system itself. So it could take a couple of minutes for that to happen, but that computer should now go into maintenance mode, and we've done that through the execution of an integrated runbook. So for those of you that are looking to make investments in automation, Orchestrator is a great tool for that process and to achieve that result. And with the integration from our free management pack, this will just give you that much more flexibility within your Operations Manager framework. If we refresh, see if it is updated. My system's running a little slower than normal today, but that should update momentarily. So while that's updating, if we take a look a little bit further into our active alerts, one of the other things that we're commonly asked for, and here's actually a result of one of the tasks that I ran a few minutes ago, we're asked to monitor for changes to the local administrators group. So the task that I ran a few minutes ago to add the account Mr. Singapore to our MMS Web 01 system was something that can also be monitored for an alert generated on. So here we're seeing the results of that so that we can start to actually audit our actions within SCOM. In fact, we can go a little bit beyond that, and we can audit the changes within SCOM. So although not natively possible through the enabling of auditing and object access in the Windows operating system, one of the things that we have been asked for time and again by customers is it possible for me to know who's making changes, who's making overrides, who's creating rules, who's creating monitors? So it's likely that you have a process in place to allow specific individuals to make changes, but what's not possible natively is to determine what change was made and to what management pack and by whom. So what we've done is created what we call our audit management pack that will go out and monitor for changes taking place, but it will also back up your management packs so that, at least your unsealed management packs, which is the packs you'll make changes to, so that you're able to then, if a change was made that wasn't approved or that had detrimental results, you can roll back to the earlier version that was backed up previously. So this avoids you having to go in and try to figure out where the change was made, locate an older version of that pack, which may not have all of the changes in it up to the point when it was running well, but then the additional change was made that led to issues. So here we can quickly and easily identify what those changes were that were made, and we'll be alerted to that as the operations manager administrator. More than that, if we drill into our Windows Explorer and we take a look at our SCOM MPs, what you'll notice in here is we back up based on a date and timestamp. We kick off an initial backup when the MP is imported, and then we back up after that, but not daily, only when changes have been detected. And furthermore, we list in a text file what changes have been made during that time frame or that time period. So as an example, you can see that we originally imported and configured this on the 5th, or the 4th, the 5th, yeah, the 5th. And here we've made some changes. So if we go into this, this will show you exactly what has changed. And these are all the different management packs that we've worked with at that point in time. If we look to our other MP list that were found, we can now see all of the versions and all of the management packs by name that are now imported and included within our environment, both sealed and unsealed within this. If we take a look in one of the folders, this is where we can drill into the actual details of what's been changed. And these file names correspond to the alerts that we're seeing within Operations Manager. So if you're interested in knowing which rules recently changed in your Server 2008 monitoring, here we can see the rules that were detected. And this looks like it was likely through an import, so it wasn't a significant change by a user in terms of overrides. But if we look at our overrides in particular, we can see what override was last modified and the date and timestamp of when that override occurred. So this will now allow us to go back and maybe look at a change control or part of your business process to determine if changes were scheduled, and if they were, what those changes were. Or it will simply allow you, if you don't go to that extreme, to identify and find that override. And hopefully, if there's a process to click on the edit button when creating an override and put in some context around why that was created and who made that change, you can determine whether or not that was appropriate and whether that should stay or be removed from your system. So this gives us some auditing and tracking capabilities within Operations Manager that can be beneficial to help you in your ongoing efforts to keep the system clean and reliable. So in addition to your overrides that were recently detected, if we scroll down a little further, we've got examples here of monitors that were recently changed, rules that were recently changed, and finally another alert looking at computers without agents that are in Active Directory. So once you've completed your Operations Manager deployment, one of the challenges that you'll face is ensuring that any newly provisioned system, physical or virtual, has a SCOM agent on it, if it is supposed to. And so what we're able to do here is through a rule, we can discover all of the systems within Active Directory and compare those to all of the systems in SCOM that have an agent on them, and then output the difference. so that you're able to determine whether or not the difference, the files, the systems shown here, require an operations manager agent on them. And we should then take that as a remediation action and kick off an automated discovery, or, depending on where they're located, perform a manual installation on those agents, so that you can ensure a level of consistency, and you're confident when asked by maybe management, are you confident, or can you tell me how many agents we have deployed and how many systems we have in Active Directory, and is that number a consistent match? Is it identical? If not, we'll see that here. So one of the other nice changes. Really, the last point that I want to make in our presentation today is around the triaging and management of noise, alert noise, within your organization. So one of the questions that comes up is, what can I do to deal with the volume of information that comes in? Because a critical alert in Operations Manager doesn't necessarily correspond to a Severity 1 outage in my organization. So I want to be able to map or translate a critical alert in SCOM to a Severity 2, Severity 3. But more than that, I want to also highlight which operations group that alert corresponds to, so that when I get to a point where I'm comfortable with my alert volume in Operations Manager, and I want to go about forwarding some of those alerts off to a ticketing system, I have a level of confidence that I'm not going to flood my ticketing system and open up thousands of incidents based on how I'm passing information across, be it through a connector or even through Orchestrator or Opalis. So what we've done is we put together what we call a triage MP that allows you to break down and determine through a set of text files, where we provide you some guidance in here, the different severity mappings. So if we look at the different assignment files, we've just created 2. We've created them with very specific names, and the naming convention is important for them to work in the management pack. But we can create multiple P1 or P2, P3, P4, really a number of priorities are available. And within those, we simply take the alert name that comes in from SCOM. We populate the alert names in the text file. That way, whenever this alert comes in, again in the future, there'll be a rule that runs on the operations management server that looks through all of the text files for a match and then assigns the priority level based on the text file name to that alert. And now you're able to filter on that because it's populated in a custom field. So let's take a look at that. So we've got an example in our, we should have an example here. Here we go. So we have an example here, VM not in a healthy state. If I double click on that alert, you'll notice that it's been assigned to virtualization support, and it's been processed by it has a new status, a new resolution state, which corresponds to a numeric equivalent of 11 in this case, called automatically triaged. And if we go to custom fields, we'll notice that the custom fields have been populated with priority 2. So now what we're able to do is filter based on custom field 1 equaling priority underscore 2, and we'll know, based on the information on the general tab in the owner, that this is meant for our virtualization support group. So now we know that it's a priority 2 event. It needs to go out to virtualization support, and we can quite easily filter that and pass that along, whether it's through a connector or an Opalis orchestrator integration out to a third-party incident management or ticketing system, or whether this is simply for native notifications that we'll build within Operations Manager. The native notifications have a number of different criteria that we're able to select, and owner is one of those, as are the different custom fields that will allow us to ensure that the virtualization group receives these maybe 24/7 if it's a P2, or maybe only during business hours if it's a P2, and 24/7 if it's a priority 1 type of issue. So this gives us an added level or an increased level of flexibility and functionality that will allow you to better direct and manage the information within your environment. Furthermore, if we think about the custom fields and the mappings, what we're able to do here is, actually I'll just go back in there for a second, and I'll copy that. We could then create custom views. So now you could break this down and scope these views out to the different support groups within your organization. So in this case, I'll create an alert view, and I'll call it priority 2 vert. And now we can look at what it is that we're going to hone in on. So in terms of the different conditions, if we scroll down, we can see that with specific text in custom field 1 is listed here, and I could populate that. We also know that it had a specific owner, so I could add that additional condition or filter criteria into this as well to build out this alert view. So we'll just click Save, because I know it takes a little long in my system for that to save and populate. But what we should now see is any alerts in our priority 2, as that starts to populate, view that are in our console. Let's try a refresh to get that to show up. It's in a refreshing state right now. So that's one of the other ways that we can more efficiently and effectively deal with some of that alert noise. One of the views that I would caution you to rarely, if ever, use is the default active alerts view. You might use this as the SCOM administrator, but never recommend or expose this to any of your support groups within your organization. They'll immediately be turned off from the product just due to the volume of noise. So by building out custom views and scoping that to your different support groups, it'll help you to develop buy-in and build support for the application and its usefulness by allowing that support group to see the information that's most relevant to them. So as SCOM admins, we might use the active alerts view, but traditionally as a support group, you might look at building out additional views and then using some filtering criteria to populate the data within those views. And here we can see that based on that custom field 1 filter, we've now isolated the number of critical alerts down to a single alert. So just going back to the slides to wrap things up, we've looked at the orchestrator integration through the runbooks. We've talked about desktop monitoring and how the combination of operations manager, configuration manager, and orchestrator can work together to help you remediate issues within your organization. Hopefully, you have a better understanding of how you can now leverage your operations manager infrastructure, both for client and server monitoring, and take advantage of config manager to look at unique settings and ensure a level of standardization across your different systems that you're monitoring, and that you'll benefit from improved remediation both through native integrated tasks or custom tasks within Operations Manager, or through the integration of your orchestrator runbooks, which you'll have built out and then can expose within Operations Manager as well. So please fill out a survey. Provide us with some feedback on the session. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been valuable. Hope you can leave today with some ideas that you can take back to your organization. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A session for this session specifically later on today. I believe it's at 5:30, and I'll be there to answer any questions you have. But certainly if there are any questions at this point in time, be happy to take those. We have about 10 minutes left, and I can take some after the session as well. So if you do have a question, just please come up to a mic. Be happy to answer that.
Hi, Brew. Is this on? Oh, well. My question is around whether or not Ops Manager can pull CPU temperature natively.
So the question is, can Ops Manager pull CPU temperature
Correct.
natively? The answer is yes. So that information can be pulled either from your OEM agent that would provide that. It could be pulled through an SNMP data point or an OID that you could collect that on an ongoing basis. If you're simply looking to collect it, it would likely be through a collection rule that you would create. If you're looking to alert on it, if it exceeds a given threshold, you would likely use a monitor in that case, so that that monitor could automatically reset if it then dropped below a certain threshold as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Perfect. Any other questions? Yeah?
Yes, you're talking about the overrides and being able to audit those things. It's very important to us.
Yes.
Did you confer
is?
So you are able to see what you will be able to determine what the previous and new settings are. Through the example that I gave, that information wasn't exposed. But because we had backed up the original unsealed pack and the current change or setting is in the existing pack, you could make a comparison between the two by using a free but unsupported tool called MP Viewer to go in and view the two MPs.
Right.
But to see the individual user, no, you're not able to see that individual.
All right, so not even in the new version of the tool.
Sorry, not even?
Not even in SCOM 2012.
No, you're not able to see that individual. Not in what we showed you here.
Okay. All right, thank you.
One other question, and we'll wrap things up.
Okay, so you had mentioned earlier that when you're looking at an organization that has tens and thousands of endpoints in environments, such as in my company, what you show individually is really effective, how you remediate and all that. But overall, as a compliance, you need a chart or some sort of report to show your compliance overall status. For example, BitLocker or whatever.
Right.
Is there tool sets available in System Center to help us do that?
Yes, great question. So the question is, you work in a large organization with tens of thousands of systems, and it's great to see the individual one-off compliance settings by going to a box. That wouldn't be an efficient way to do things in a larger org. Is there a global report? And yes, there are numerous global reports, almost close to 400 in Configuration Manager natively with the reporting component. But if the data doesn't happen to be there, you could also easily author your own report through some SQL queries and present that data globally. But SCCM does provide a global compliance report out of the box.
How about importing of existing security? So for example, there's a lot of security databases out there with all this, so you don't have to create every one of them. Can you import things like SOC compliance or all the different ones out there?
So the question is, are you able to leverage some of the System Center tools for compliance?
Well, no, I mean like industry standards.
Yes, like PCI and SOX.
Right,
so
that's right.
There are third-party management packs that you can import into Operations Manager that will allow you to collect industry standard compliance settings and values and then report on those. That's not something that is natively included in SCOM, but there are third-party offerings that can allow you to do that. There are also some GRC offerings for Service Manager that can present you some compliance data as well, and those are things that are provided by Microsoft.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great conference.